Everybody was kung fu fighting. I've just been watching a documentary that's broadcast by the BBC, British Broadcasting Corporation in England, 2011, 11 years ago. Sort of documentary on martial arts, really good. A few little points wrong, but that's Anaraki stuff. But it starts off with it went into the old Bartitsu thing, the martial art, sort of mixed martial art that was developed by, what's his name, Barton Wright, Edward William Barton Wright. He was an Englishman and he went to Japan and he learnt jiu-jitsu there, and he came back and he mixed it all up. 1898, I think he started that style he called Bartitsu, but it was sort of immortalised in a Sherlock Holmes story. Which, if you know Sherlock Holmes, when Conan Doyle wanted to kill Sherlock Holmes off, he felt it was like an albatross. The success was too much, so he made Holmes fight his arch nemesis Professor Moriarty on the edge of the Reichenbach Falls, and they both plummeted to their doom, or apparently plummeted to their doom, as witnessed by Dr. Watson, Holmes's faithful scribe. Anyway, there was a huge protest about this. The stories had been serialised in the Strand magazine. So the Strand, and I think 20,000 people cancelled their subscriptions, and the magazine almost tanked. And Conan Doyle, there was like people picketing outside his house, and he got attacked by an old woman with an umbrella in the street, saying "Bring back Holmes." And eventually, 10 years later, he did. So 1983 being the final problem, the story where Holmes apparently dies. And 1903, he released The Adventure of the Empty House, where Holmes comes back, and it transpired that he survived, and only one person plummeted down the Reichenbach Falls, and that was Moriarty. As Holmes, when he's revealed himself again to Watson, and Watson passes out through the shock of it and everything, because he thinks he's been dead for 10 years. But Holmes describes when they both had they arranged. It was all very gentlemanly. If you read that, he leaves an account for Watson to read originally, like just before they fight on the edge of the falls. But this time he tells Watson that when Moriarty came at him, he rushed at me and threw his long arms around me. He knew that his own game was up and was only anxious to revenge himself upon me. We tottered together upon the brink of the fall. I have some knowledge, however, of Bartitsu, or the Japanese system of wrestling, which has more than once been very useful to me. I slipped through his grip, and he, with a horrible scream, kicked madly for a few seconds and clawed the air with both his hands. But for all his efforts, he could not get his balance, and over he went. With my face over the brink, I saw him fall for a long way. Then he struck a rock, bounced off, and splashed into the water. That was the end of the evil Professor Moriarty. So yeah, but he noticed that he mispronounced Bartitsu as Bartitsu. And also, if he's, as I said, Barton Wright didn't give a name to his style, it seems, till 1898. So he would not have known this in 1893, which was when the final problem, that the fight took place. And he says Japanese system of wrestling, and of course that would be jiu-jitsu. Jiu-jitsu was what Barton Wright incorporated into his style, which he mixed up with several other things. He incorporated boxing, jiu-jitsu, yes, cane fighting, that's a big one, and French kickboxing, which I think is pronounced savate. So he'd been, 1898, he pronounced it. He'd been 3 years in Japan. He came back to him and he said, I've got this great new style of self-defense. And I've incorporated various things into it, and it's called Bartitsu. And he was quite keen on publicising it, and it says here he engaged toughs until he was satisfied with the application of his style. I think that means he just went on starting fights with anyone who looked tough enough to give him a go, and he could say, see, it works against even someone like that, some sort of rough person in a pub or something. Barton Wright placed particular emphasis on the cane as a weapon. And even in the Sherlock Holmes, there's one Sherlock Holmes book where he gets attacked and he has to fend off his attackers with a cane. So it was known as doubling as a weapon, and basically every sort of middle class and upper class, it was a must when they went out. Fetch me my cane. And Barton Wright wrote, blows can be so formidable that with an ordinary Malacca cane, whatever that is, with an ordinary cane, it is possible to sever a man's jugular vein through the collar of his overcoat. Quite a broad claim. Uh, so he was definitely of the entrepreneurial type, Barton Wright, and he established his Bartitsu Academy of Arms and Physical Culture. Bartitsu, by the way, is obviously it's an amalgamation of jitsu, of the jiu-jitsu, and his surname Barton Bartitsu. So he formed the Bartitsu Academy of Arms and Physical Culture, known colloquially as the Bartitsu Club, which was located in Soho, which was by then a quite flashy part of London. And it was described by a journalist as a huge subterranean hall, all glittering white tiled walls and electric light, with champions, for some reason, placed in those what they call them? Quotations, with champions prowling around it like tigers. And he sought the well-to-do clientele. There was a waiting list. People had to be recommended. Fees were no doubt quite high. He had notable politicians. He had athletes. He had one of the few male survivors of the Titanic at one point. This must have been a few years on after he formed it. Sir Cosmo Duff Gordon. Yes, this club is organised on the model of the Victorian Sporting Club. Prospective members submitted their applications to a committee, so they had to be approved. So it was pretty highfalutin stuff. And he was able, Barton Wright, using his contacts from when he'd been in Japan those 3 years, he got across, or he wrote a letter to none other than Jigoro Kano. By the way, I pronounced Kano. I don't know what I was thinking. Kano, of course. Kakikukeko, the phonetic alphabet, Kano. Jigoro Kano. He wrote a letter to the judo founder, Jigoro Kano, who sent across several high-ranking of his instructors to teach at Barton Wright's club. So he was doing really well for a while, Barton Wright. But eventually, sort of, it fell out of fashion. As I say, he charged like a wounded bull, and that sort of started rubbing people up the wrong way once the glitz and glamour of this newly found thing had been dulled a bit. And he was working. He got a bit of a reputation of being a bit of a crank, Barton, right? He'd been working as a physical therapist as well as doing all this sort of set up his club and that. So Squirrel's got a rip. So he was working as a physical therapist, and he had this quite obsession with using strange electrical machinery. It's like a Victorian Gothic novel. Electricity being the wonder thing that had been invented, and he was trying to use it to cure everything from arthritis to gout. And he got a bit of a reputation for being a bit of a crank. He was prone to trying to invest in things that maybe he shouldn't. Well, he definitely shouldn't have done, because he lost money big time in a few unwise investments, and as a result, he was made bankrupt several times. Recently, Bartitsu has actually, I think I read something, there's 50 clubs at the moment in Europe and America. It's kind of been resurrected, but when it went out of fashion, it was because people who went to his club originally, and he's brought back this marvelous, strange, wonderful fighting art from the Orient. They went to his club first, and then they actually, he's charging loads of money and stuff. And actually, what inspired his club? Where's the root thing? And through this, they found judo and jiu-jitsu. Especially, funny enough, the suffragettes, the women in England campaigning for the vote, they were particularly taken with jiu-jitsu. And I think Emily Pankhurst, one of the chief head suffragettes, she actually had a bodyguard of women who practiced jiu-jitsu endlessly, and they'd improvised cardboard armour underneath their clothes, their normal clothes. And they'd have skirmishes with the police and stuff and distract the authorities while Emily Pankhurst tried to give her speeches and stuff. So there was a kind of move from Barton Wright's newfangled one-size-fits-all type thing to actually trying to see, well, where does his thing come from? What's the actual original thing to do? Judo and jiu-jitsu, and that was judo and jiu-jitsu. Jiu-jitsu at first, obviously, because judo came from jiu-jitsu. But English society went to that, and more Japanese instructors came over, and the actual Japanese martial arts started to become very popular. So poor Barton Wright, he kind of fell out of favour, and he went bankrupt several times, I think I said already. And he actually died in my hometown, Kingston upon Thames, southwest London. He's buried in the it says here, Kingston Cemetery. It's Bonner Hill Cemetery. I know it very, very well. It's just so a bit nerdy, but I used to go up there when I was 8 on my bike. He's got an unmarked grave there, and there's some campaign to have it replaced with a proper headstone and give him respect, because he he obviously was he was quite a character and very, very determined and driven man. And it could be said that he helped bring over the Oriental martial arts, even if his own thing didn't work out like he wanted it to. Yes, that was just inspired there by seeing that documentary, which I'll link. Everybody was kung fu fighting, and mine reminisces because I'm a Sherlock Holmes nut. And yeah, moving on there to Barton Wright, the English entrepreneur and martial arts fanatic.